Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to our Friday Conversations on Care, a Facebook talk show, bringing together our service providers, our clients, our caregivers, all to better help families understand and cope with aging parents and their chronic care needs. My name is Julie Collada, and I am the proud founder and president of Open Arms Solutions. And Open Arms is a home care agency serving the Chicagoland area, focused on inspired home care solutions for seniors with chronic conditions such as dementia, Parkinson's, and other movement disorders. It is our mission to help our families through their journey and to know that their loved one is living their best life possible. If you find these dialogues helpful, please like our Facebook page and share these videos so that we can reach more people who really can benefit from this information. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to learn more about, please write them in the comments section below. With me today is Dr. Jennifer Wilson-Binotti, and Jennifer is a licensed clinical psychologist and a clinical neurologist. Welcome, Jennifer.
Neuropsychologist, Julie.
Neuropsychologist. Thank you.
But I appreciate the upgrade.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the correction. Great to have you here. You know, you and I talked a little bit, I think, on yesterday. Looking forward to this conversation very much. The topic is so important to people because people, the reality is people come across a question, a challenge about a caregiver's cognitive state. And so what we're going to talk about together is how do you evaluate your loved one's cognitive state? So we have the right person here with an amazing amount of education and expertise to help us talk about that topic. Jennifer, let's start with what put you on this path at this point and to get to where you are at this point in your career?
That's an excellent question. And just like everything else in my life, I sort of tripped into it. But it was the right thing to happen at the right time. I went back to school, middle age, wanting to have a career that was meaningful to me. I figured if I was going to work 20 to 25 more years, I wanted it to mean something to me. And meaning something to me means helping other people. And so I went back to school, became a psychologist, thinking that I would do therapy. But as I got more and more training in evaluation, I found that that was something I wanted to pursue. Now, there's evaluation of across the age range, but I found that as time went on, I enjoyed evaluating for the dementias, and that became my expertise. And I joined a practice where that is what I did, and then I started my own practice where the focus is on older adults with neurocognitive disorders.
Okay, well, and I so appreciate that explanation. And you and I chatted a little bit. I never expected to be in this industry too, but a personal experience brought me here. Right. And I'm incredibly grateful that it did, because it is, while what we do is hard work, it's such important work. And we know at the end of the day, we're really making a difference in people's lives. And that is so meaningful and so important. So let's just back up a little bit and talk about what you described a little bit about what you do. Mm-hmm. But what does a clinical neuropsychologist do, and what kind of patients do you see?
Yeah, so clinical neuropsychologist does evaluation with tests to help to understand how the brain is functioning. And when things go wrong, what might be going wrong? What might we need to know about this individual to help correct the problem or to treat the problem? And so in older adults, usually the problem has to do with a dementia process. So what is going on with this person that someone has seen a change from their previous level of functioning? And why are we seeing a decline, or why are we seeing emotional upset or strange behaviors that we've not seen before? And tests can help us to ferret through that and figure it out.
Sure. And what kind of tests are those? Can you describe what the test process is like?
You bet. Usually, of course, there's memory tests, and there are different kinds of memory tests we do. We also do executive function tests, organization, planning, judgment, um, complex processing of information. Also, language tests. We want to understand their expressive and receptive language function. And then those tests, with those results, we build a cognitive profile. And the profile can tell us pretty accurately what a diagnosis might be and what we need to do to help that person.
That's it's important, and it's also, I imagine, for people scary.
Oh, it's terrifying.
It's terrifying, right? It's not a so when people so give a little bit about a little bit of a from your experience. Well, what are the who reaches out to you? Is it the adult children? Is it who in families do you talk to? And really, let's just talk a little bit why how do we get past and why should we get past that scariness and terrifying idea?
No. Usually, and I'm sure that you've experienced this, family members will wait until things are become an emergency. And it's because they're afraid, right?
Yeah, sure.
We don't want to know. And it's not until we have to know that kids might reach out. And yes, it's very often it's kids. Sometimes it's spouses. And then there are other referral sources, such as attorneys, okay, with families who need to know if someone has capacity to make decisions. Okay, that's a big referral question.
Sure.
It's doctors. Doctors want to know, families might take their family member to the doctor and say, mom or dad is acting strange and having memory problems. The doctor will say, you know what, I want you to go get some neuropsychological testing, and we can understand it better.
Sure, absolutely. And that's what was the case with my mom. The initial, her initial symptoms, they came on, rather quickly, and that doesn't always happen. But that was from the vascular dementia part of her disease, and but for me, it took over 2 weeks. I was in denial.
Yes.
And I suspect that you see that too. I know we see this in the industry all the time. When I talk to, leaders in the industry, what are some of your biggest challenges you face when you're working with your clients and their families is really that in my experience is the number one reason people don't seek out help is just fear and denial.
Absolutely, fear and denial. It's really terrifying, and I find that the evaluations and the reports I do are for the family. That's who really benefits, because it gets laid out logically and practically, and then there are referrals in the report that send them on a path that help them to know what to do next.
And that's the benefit of knowing. Right. That's the benefit of pushing past the fear and making the phone call to start the process to get evaluated, because understanding the path is so important. There are so many, as you know, right? And I do a lot of talking and education on this, as we've talked, you do too. Mm-hmm. There are many kinds of dementia.
Yes.
And each dementia, it affects different parts of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it has a different effect on an individual and how they interact with the world, and how fast the disease progresses, and all these things. So can you just talk a little bit about that from your expertise? Just
Sure.
what are the different kinds of dementias, and what are the different things, the behaviors that are caused? We call them behaviors.
We do.
Um, and I don't know if that's a good term or not term or a bad term. It's a term that's used in the industry, and the idea behind it is that it's something that happens that's out of the ordinary. Is that a good way to describe it?
It is a good way to describe it. I mean, I saw a woman recently who was putting furniture in front of the door at night, and that had to do with her delusions related to Alzheimer's. And in Alzheimer's, you might see hallucinations and delusions um, in up to half of sufferers. And these are in people that haven't previously experienced that in their loved one. And it's a paranoid, paranoid thought process. She thought that people were coming in the night. Okay. So families, they start seeing that behavior. Of course, they're alarmed. And the first thing they do is they go to a doctor. Doctor might prescribe an antipsychotic, and in certain dementias, antipsychotic medications are counter to the dementia. So with Lewy body dementia, it might make people aggressive.
Yeah.
So we want to get that diagnosis before we prescribe medication. Now, back to the original question of the types of dementia, 70% of all dementias is comprised of Alzheimer's. All right. I get the question so often of what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. There isn't. Dementia is the umbrella term of which one type, the most prevalent type, is Alzheimer's. And then there's vascular dementia, and that comprises a pure vascular dementia comprises 10% of all dementias. Most of the time, Alzheimer's and vascular dementia co-occur. Okay, so we see an early cerebrovascular etiology will what we call cascade into Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And they go hand in hand.
Yes.
Yeah. The next most prevalent type would be Lewy body dementia, is similar to Parkinson's. Okay, there are prominent hallucinations with that type and delusions, and they're different in quality from what we see in Alzheimer's. Delusions and hallucinations in Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's occur early in the process. In Alzheimer's, it's in the mid to late stages where we see delusions and hallucinations. And this all gets ferreted out with neuropsychological testing and when we get a good case history from the family or whoever else is observing the person.
Sure.
A facility where I get a lot of referrals, and I go into facilities and go into people's homes, but I'll go to a facility and they'll say, you know what, there's a change in this resident's behavior. We'd like to understand what's happening so we can help her and treat her. So it might be all of a sudden she's having hallucinations and she's in her late 60s, say, or early 70s. First thing I'm going to think of is Lewy body dementia. Okay, because there's different age where it is more often to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the less prevalent types, frontal temporal dementia. These occur in people in their 50s and 60s. Very devastating. The atrophy begins in the frontal lobe, and you may see really aberrant behavior where even in younger men, meaning in their 50s and 60s, we might see some disinhibited sexual behavior, for example, that would have never happened before. You would have to ask that question, is there a frontal temporal dementia occurring? And we'd want to do brain scans and neuropsychological testing. And then there are the Parkinsonism, and these are like Parkinson's, but not exactly. So we call them subcortical dementias. They're below the cortices. So those are the main types.
Yeah. Well, thank you for describing that. And they all have different, as we said, we talked about the different implications and strategies to
Right.
really interact with an individual. And
Right.
the other thing that you and I talked about that I think is really before this program that I think is really important for people who are listening, to the family members that are listening, and also, professional caregivers, um, is that, and I'm sure that many of us that are in the field realize that when families see their loved ones behaving differently, it's very frightening.
Yeah.
And um, and then there's the frustration of not knowing how to interact with their loved one and getting all sorts of different responses than they ever got, and that's incredibly unsettling to
Yes. Yes, it
people,
is. Yeah.
understandably so. It was with me and my mom and my mother-in-law. I think that education is such an important part, education for family members.
Yeah.
And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because I know you do a lot of it. But when we talk to professionals in senior care, that is one of the things that we are, all so clear about, is that the more and more education that we can do for family members helps the family member, and it helps either the client or the patient or whoever we're responsible for. If we have family members that don't understand the disease process,
Right.
it can be even more challenging.
Well, they
So,
get angry. Families get angry. I had a daughter ask me the other day, is she just faking like she's forgetting, or is she really forgetting? No, she's not faking it. She's really, really forgetting. And
right,
families get frustrated, but once they understand what's happening, basically we're calibrating family members' expectations is what we're doing when we educate. So uh, talk about Alzheimer's, the person with the disease regresses back in their own timeline in terms of memory. And so they'll say, families will say, well, she's talking about her childhood home and thinks she has to go back there. Well, she's regressed back a long way. And so for families to connect with this person, they shouldn't say things like, oh, come on, mom, you remember we live at da 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 da. You have to meet that person where they are. And if they're that far back, then you go that far back. Mom, tell me about your mom and dad and what your life was like at that age.
yeah,
And then you can connect.
yep. Uh, I know with my family, and we hear this a lot from our clients. Just another example is, people with Alzheimer's, which is as you said, the great majority of all dementias. One of the first parts of the brain that starts to break down is the hippocampus, that is, all about storing short-term memories, right?
Mhm.
And I remember talking to my husband about it and sister-in-law, because, and brother-in-law, understandably so, they were getting very frustrated,
Right.
which is very typical because, the same question would be asked over and over and over and
Yes.
over again.
Yes.
And so I find that for a lot of people, when they understand where the physical breakdown is in the brain, and that this
Yeah.
is really a disease, it's not,
Yeah.
this is why this individual keeps asking the same question, because this part of the brain is affected and this part of the brain isn't working.
That's right.
It just, it doesn't make it all better, but at least it makes it make sense,
It does.
and
It does.
it makes it more real. Like,
It
okay, this
helps
is
so
my
much.
mom's part of her brain is it's a disease. It's affecting this part of the brain, and that's why this is happening.
That is absolutely correct. When I do presentations, I describe the hippocampus like the librarian. And books come in and out through the librarian and
Mm,
gets filed and then gets pulled from file to come out again for retrieval. And I talk about early in the process, the hippocampus as a librarian goes on a smoking break. And so you'll see different lapses. And then librarian goes on sabbatical. And then pretty much the librarian gets fired or quits and nothing is coming in and out. And that's when you see that constant repetition of questions.
that
And basically, you just answer the question as if you've not heard it before. Because when you escalate emotionally with frustration, they're going to escalate too. and they have less ability to monitor themselves emotionally, to manage their own behavior. And so you'll get acting out and you'll get crying, screaming, accusations. When if you just answer as if you've never answered that question before, then the person doesn't escalate, or there's less chance of the person escalating.
Right. And that takes a lot of understanding and support and
And
patience
acceptance.
and acceptance. It starts with acceptance.
It really does.
Yes.
It really does.
Yeah.
And I like to inject and urge families to use humor as a buffer, because humor can really soften that blow
Mm-hmm.
for a situation that is otherwise incredibly tragic.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's great advice and very important. The best you can. And there can be incredible moments of joy and
Yes.
laughter and
Yes.
lightness.
Yes.
Once you get past, of course, all the stages of really mourning, because you're mourning the person that was, and now you have a different person that you're in front of. So, but once you get past that, there can be a great amount of joy, and that's what we always look for. Looks like there's a question that's popped up.
There is a question. Go ahead.
If speaking about the loved one's younger years is upsetting to them, should we stay away from that conversation?
Yes.
And redirect them to something else?
Absolutely. Many of them are very redirectable, and it's easy to do. Here's an example. I have a friend that's a social worker, and she had a resident at the facility she was at who was absolutely obsessed with thinking someone was going to steal her purple pants. Of course, my friend said to me, no one would ever want her purple pants, number one. But the way she did it was, you know what? When I was a kid, there was a clown at the circus I went to that had some purple polka dot pants. Have you ever been at the circus? And so you just take that piece that they're fixated on, turn it around, and send it in a different direction. If that doesn't work, you try another track, and you're going to catch something.
Yeah.
You're going to catch them to go on that separate track.
Yeah, that's a great example. And that's a really important part of training for caregivers, whether it's a family caregiver or a professional caregiver, is really understanding the right techniques
That's right.
to redirect. Because that's so important for happiness on all ends.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking at the time right now, and I want to make sure it's important for us to get to some other kind of people thinking about the process of testing. So when the family comes in, when you get the phone call and you decide together that testing is the right next step, describe that? Describe
what happens. Yeah. All right. So what I always keep in mind is it was very difficult for this family to make that phone call. So I make it as easy as possible and remove as many barriers as possible. All right. So I go to their homes. All right. So I make it so that it's not a big project to get the person out, because very often at that stage, it's a big project to get the person out. But it also helps me to see what their environment looks like and how they interact in their own environment. It gives me a data point. And basically, I tell them what's going to happen, prepare the person, make sure that they have a good night's sleep and they have some breakfast and that they're comfortable. And then I show up, and my first goal is to put the person at ease. And so we'll sit and chat for a while. But during this chat, I'm gathering information about the person. I'm gathering an idea about where they are in their memory regression, their mood, behavior, how receptive they are to me, or how defensive they are. And that informs the next approach that I take. The testing is done alone with the person, but I don't have the family leave until I know that that person is going to feel comfortable interacting with me alone. I have tell the person that they can take breaks in the testing, that they are welcome if they need to go out and smoke. I want them to do that so that they're physically comfortable. If they need to go to the restroom, if they need to get a snack, I make it a very relaxed environment so that they do their best and I get the most accurate reading. As far as like paperwork that might be done ahead of time, I don't make the families fill it out ahead of time. Again, my job is to remove barriers so that they feel comfortable. And so we do it while I'm there. And that's all part of the process. So for me, it's about removing questions and making an ambiguous situation more predictable for everybody.
All right. That's helpful. Who pays for this insurance?
Excellent question. So,
not insurance, excuse me. Who pays for this test?
Evaluation.
Yeah, this evaluation. Yep.
So traditional Medicare does cover at 80%, no doctor's orders required, and then a supplemental policy will cover the rest. Now, people are really latching on to Medicare Advantage plans, and I have my opinion about that, and it's based on experience here. They make you think you're getting a lot of extra benefits and you're not giving anything up, but you are. Okay. You may need to get approval for the neuropsychological evaluation. It may not get approved. It may not cover at the same rate, and you end up getting a bill that's a little bigger than you might otherwise, or it's not, it's maybe covered at only 60% rather than 80%. So I really caution you to watch the language of the ads on TV and to look into what you're really giving up. The other point of that is you're paying into Medicare all the time you're working. Take advantage of that. There really is very good coverage for Medicare. And I'm talking about traditional Medicare. Now, I bill insurance directly. Okay. So you don't need to worry about that until if you don't have a supplemental policy, you may get a bill for the balance. Okay. But otherwise it would be covered in full.
Great. Thanks for explaining that. Here's another question. How can you best initiate a conversation, education with, this is a really great question.
It is.
With family members who may be in denial as their loved one declines?
That's such a good question, because very often what comes with it is they don't know there's anything wrong, or they know there's something wrong, but they don't want to know and they're afraid, right? That is a barrier that a lot of families have. Actually, after this presentation, I'm actually going to a family home to talk with the person about what's going on. Okay. So I'm doing a little hand holding, which is fine. So that may be one way we approach it. Another way we approach it is we might say, hey, Dr. Jenny, and we say Dr. Jenny so that they're not afraid. And by the way, I dress casually to go to these things so that I don't want to make them afraid. It helps them to relax. You say, Dr. Jenny's coming. We're just going to talk a little bit. And then once I'm in the door, I can usually take the ball from there pretty well. Even if the person only engages in some of the testing, I can usually render an opinion.
Okay. Well, certainly putting people at ease so you can diminish the anxiety and all the other things that goes along with it is so important. Hey, we're running very short on time, and I knew we would, because there's so much more we want to talk about. But there's a topic I want to make sure we talk about, and that is that, can we talk about depression and anxiety? Speaking of anxiety, and how that can affect memory and other cognitive issues, and how sometimes it masks what's really going on.
Yes. So it is very common as people age, whether they're in the normal aging process or a dementia process, very common for them to have depression and anxiety. So let's think about this. We're aging. And we've got friends dying. We might even age to the point we're having kids dying. Okay. Our spouses are dying. We can't drive anymore. Our health is failing, right? Tell
Right.
me about loss across the board.
Right.
Okay. That's
Mm-hmm.
just the practical aspect of it. But then we're having changes in our brains and our neurotransmitters where we're having organic depression and anxiety. So with Alzheimer's, in many cases, anxiety is part of the organic process. And so we need to treat that. Depression is very common as an organic part of the process. We need to treat that. Can it affect test results? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who, the referral question might be, how much is depression and is there a dementia process? Neuropsychological testing can help us to tease this apart. And there are cases where all I'm finding is depression, but it is so bad that they're not remembering things, that they're not able to organize themselves. They're very confused.
Yeah.
Usually these are cases that the depression is so bad they need to be hospitalized and treated.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a very different treatment than dementia.
Yes.
So if it's just so important, so critical to be able to ferret
Yes.
those things out to make the appropriate treatment plan for an individual.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, that stated, if usually in people over 70, there is both processes going on,
Yeah.
co-occurring, and we treat both. Okay, so that's part of the treatment plan and recommendations.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for explaining that. I think we are out of time.
It went fast.
I want to make sure that people know how to reach you. So if someone needs to contact you or someone wants to make a referral to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, phone call or email they're fine. Yeah,
Okay.
anyway.
And it looks like, Sarah, thank you. Your contact information is in the comments section, so you all can see that. As Jennifer has said, Dr. Binotti has said, insurance covers this. Please reach out. I know that you are a wonderful source for us, and I'm excited to really thank you, Jennifer Hartman, for introducing us, our liaison, because you're going to be a wonderful resource for our company and for the families that we take care of. So pleasure to get to know you. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, and I'm sure this was helpful to a lot of people that were watching.
No, it was great. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much.